But I want to ask you about the state of two other SEC teams, Tennessee and Alabama, and really one specifically. Tennessee beats Alabama 24-17 today. Kind of the typical game that you and I talk about sometimes. Entertaining finish. I don't know that I would call it a great game overall, though. 5 total turnovers between the three teams. Between the two teams, 26 total turnovers for 200 yards, over 200 yards in penalty yardage in this game. Obviously, the very interesting scenario came late in the game. Alabama was trailing 21-17 with under 2 minutes to go, and they had their timeouts. They decided to go for it on 4th and 22. Now, part of what made that interesting was that there was a personal foul penalty. It would have been 4th and 7, but a personal foul penalty sent him back to 4th and 22. Kalen DeBoer decides to go for it. They don't get it. Basically handed Tennessee a chip shot field goal. Alabama ends up losing by 7 on a Jalen Milroe interception. J-Mart, I actually have quite a few thoughts, especially on the Bama perspective, but I'll open up the floor to you first on Tennessee getting its second win in 3 years over Alabama, and Alabama taking a second loss in 3 weeks.
I mean, big win for Tennessee, obviously, and they did plenty of things that should have cost them the game, but Alabama did plenty of things that should have cost them the game. This was a sloppy game, a lot of penalties on both sides. Neither quarterback at his best. And look, I think that the defense has had something to do with that. Alabama's defense played better than it had in recent weeks, but I also think that Tennessee's offense has come down to earth over the last few weeks, so maybe both those things kind of worked in the same way. But the 4th and 22, I know we like guys being aggressive and going for the win, but in this situation, when you have all your timeouts and you're that far in your own territory, and your defense has done a nice job on them throughout the day. Even Sampson wasn't just killing you all game long on the ground. You didn't give them the opportunity here. Instead, you went for a very low percentage shot on 4th and 22 and then managed to, I mean, like you said, you gave up a chip shot field goal. And I didn't understand that. That felt reckless when you didn't have to be reckless. Yes, if they go get a first down on you, then the ball game's going to be over. But they did end up stopping them and forcing that field goal. And you could have done that 50 yards down the field in the other direction and not have that extra 3 points on the scoreboard. Ultimately, you didn't have enough offensively. But I think the bigger issue right now for Alabama is the lack of discipline is not something that you're used to seeing from that uniform. You're just not, because Saban didn't tolerate it. They did not play undisciplined football. They did not beat themselves on a regular basis. It might have happened once in a blue moon where they had more penalties than they should, and Saban made sure that that was not a recurring factor. All year, penalties, mental mistakes, things like that have been a concern and an issue for this Alabama team. So I think that's the biggest thing is there's a massive difference, and it's hard not to notice that as soon as Saban leaves, things kind of crack around the seams just a little bit. And maybe he saw it coming again. I mean, he got out knowing that this was not a landscape he wanted to coach in any longer, which is something I saw coming a few years ago. But DeBoer stepping in, replacing the guy, it's a tough thing to do. And now you've lost 2 games, one of them to Vanderbilt, and the chances they're getting in a playoff at this point are really remote, in my opinion.
I'm just with you 100%. Listen, I think the verdict is still going to be out on DeBoer. I'm not ready to sell all my DeBoer stock yet.
Oh, it's not fair to do that at all, but that's what's going to happen for some people.
Yeah, but what I will say, and I think what is very obvious to me, is exactly what you just said, is that the things that made Alabama under Nick Saban, now I do understand, I do get that it is a new era, a new coaching staff, new whatever. And by the way, Alabama fans will tell you 2 years ago, the Bryce Young year when they struggled, that was a very penalized team. But it doesn't change the fact that what Alabama was built on in that era was discipline and accountability. And this isn't the first time, J-Mart. I mean, I was traveling the week of the Vandy game, but obviously that Vandy game, late in the game, Malachi Moore, a safety, Vanderbilt converts the fourth down. Malachi Moore kicks the football while it's on the ground, da-da-da-da. And so I just bring it up because what I do see is a program that is still talented. Now, they certainly today they lost to a good team, so I'm not trying to diminish what Tennessee did, whatever. And it's on the road. It's on the road. So that, whatever. Good team on the road. But at the same time, you can see cracks in the foundation of not just are you losing games, but you're just not, they're not acting the way that Alabama acted in the past. And you look at, again, the selfish penalties, Kendrick Law. You look at 2 weeks ago with Malachi Moore. By the way, I just saw this tweet. On3 seems to be the one that found it. Of an Alabama player retweeting fan tweets with how unhappy he is that he's not getting the football thrown to him. Caleb Odom is the player that I'm naming here. And I just bring it up, J-Mart, because it's like, this just doesn't – it's not just that it doesn't look like Alabama in terms of the penalties and the lack of discipline, but it's also everything that program was built on doesn't seem to exist any longer.
Yeah, and those are the things that you take for granted because they're never a factor. They never beat themselves. They let other teams beat themselves. The last 2 minutes of a half, they ended up, under Saban, I don't know how many times, scoring and then forcing some kind of a turnover and getting an extra field goal at least before going in. In this game, where points were at a premium and neither offense was really firing on all cylinders, it was those kind of mistakes. It was the discipline errors like the horrible personal foul penalty at the end of the game where, look, yes, dude was taunting the Bama player right in his face, but you got to be smarter than that. He turns around, he shoves him, he gets the call. Should it have been offsetting penalties? Absolutely, especially considering the guy then threw a punch at him. But you can't bank on that. And so the referees didn't get it right, as they didn't get it right much in that game for either team and didn't get it right tonight for this Georgia-Texas game either. But the discipline and the penalties and the making a 3rd down and 2, a 3rd down and 7 because of a bad pre-snap penalty or some kind of an illegal formation or something like that, those are the things that Saban just didn't tolerate. Like, you'd see it once, and then you'd see him on the sidelines, and you'd see his face, and you would know, okay, well, that's not going to happen again. And generally it didn't. And because they're losing, and even in the wins, like they really should have lost to South Carolina last week.
No doubt.
I mean, imagine that. We could have been talking about Alabama losing 3 in a row, which is just insane. Realize this. You want to hear a stat? This is the first time since 2007 that Alabama has lost 2 games before November. It's been a long time since that has happened. And I'm not sure that they've lost their last game for the year because this is a flawed football team that is reliant on just a couple of guys, one of which in Jalen Milroe. I think it is fair at this point to say he is a streaky football player.
Well,
he is very good a lot of the time, but he can fall into a slump and look completely different for a couple of games, and I think we've seen that.
Yeah, tonight 25 of 45, 2 interceptions. And this goes back to what I talked about last week, is everybody after the Vandy game was focused on the defense. I said, it doesn't look to me like they have very much offense outside of Jalen Milroe being the bigger, stronger cousin in the backyard football game, putting the ball in his hands to run, and then Ryan Williams, the wide receiver. It's like if you take him out of the game, and that's what happened today, is that the stat was that he was targeted 16 times in that game. Now, that's good, but you got to get the ball to other guys. The guy Caleb Odom had 0 catches, the one that apparently was tweeting some things out of frustration today. So it's interesting. And I think Milroe is part of the reason that I'm not giving up on DeBoer as a coach. But I do think this team is flawed, and they're just not acting in the manner in which they did.